meeting of the Anchorage Assembly to order. Today is March 27, 2024. It is 3:02 p.m. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Member Brawley,
Oh, sorry, here on the phone.
Member Bronga,
Here.
Chair Constant,
Here.
Member Cross,
Here.
Member Johnson,
Here.
Member Martinez,
Present.
Member Myers,
Here.
Member Perez-Verdia,
Here.
Member Rivera,
Present.
Member Salt,
Here.
Member Voland,
Happy to be here.
Vice Chair Zolotel. Here. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Mr. Cross, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
Yes, sir. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Martinez, would you please read the land acknowledgement?
Thank you, Chair. A land acknowledgement is a formal statement recognizing the indigenous people of a place. It is a public gesture of appreciation for the past and present indigenous stewardship of the lands that we now occupy. It is an actionable statement that marks our collective movement towards decolonization and equity. The Anchorage Assembly would like to acknowledge that we gather today on the traditional lands of the Dena'ina Athabascans. For thousands of years, the Dena'ina have been and continue to be the stewards of this land. It is with gratefulness and with respect that we recognize the contributions, innovations, and contemporary perspectives of the Upper Cook Inlet Dena'ina. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Today, we have two items on the agenda. One is an ordinance and one is potential action on resolutions regarding appeal of public records of a municipal utility, AWU term sheet related to the Eklutna Hydropower Fish and Wildlife Program, and possible subpoena for production of relevant documents. But before that, we'll take up item 4A. Item 4A is AO 2024-28, an ordinance of the Anchorage Assembly amending Anchorage Municipal Code Section 3.20.070, 25.20.020, 25.30.020, 26.30.025, and inserting a new section 26.40.090 to require Assembly approval of actions to acquire or dispose of property rights to water, mineral, wind, or solar resources and of the Fish and Wildlife Program for the Eklutna Hydropower Project and restoration of continuous water flows to the Eklutna River. What is the will of the body? Oh, wait, excuse me. Public hearing on this item is now open. So this public hearing, members of the public are welcome to come up. We should provide a microphone if anyone wishes to be heard. Sure, come forward. We'll get a microphone set up for you. Please state your name, what part of town you're from. You'll have 3 minutes. There's a chair there as well.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, members of the Assembly. My name is Rick Whitbeck. I'm here today as both a public member and a private citizen, and on behalf of my organization, which I'm the Alaska State Director of, which is Power the Future. Let's be blunt. I've been critical of the body's attempts to intervene and interject themselves into matters where it has questionable, if any, standing to do so regarding the Eklutna Hydro reauthorization under the terms of the 1991 Fish and Wildlife Agreement. I've taken you to task in opinion pieces on the radio and on social media over your seeming willingness to lay waste to an established process set forth in the agreement under the guise of we're the Assembly, we should be involved. We're integral to the process. The owners have listened to many groups, both with standing and without, including your body as they've attempted to craft the best plan forward while balancing the interests of public water, renewable power generation, and river enhancement. And while you've been focused on those matters associated with that, matters that could have been getting your attention, homelessness, crime, how to grow our economy, continue to worsen, stagnate, or even worse, fail. Now, in another attempt to grab spotlights and diminish executive level power, you're considering this ordinance. Stop. Enough already. Stop putting 100 people in Eklutna above the 275,000 other municipality residents. Stop interjecting yourself in a process that you have no standing in. And by the way, you know that. This document right here, signed by Municipal Manager Bill Falsey back in 2020, says that you have no standing in this with the sale of ML&P. Stop jeopardizing the gains that the project's owners are making with all interested parties. Stop jeopardizing the fact that there will be water flows back to the Eklutna River better than they were before. Stop the fact that there is no word for restoration in the agreement. It's mitigation and enhancement. And you know that. But yet you're just continuing to interject yourself in a process. You threaten legal action, and by doing so, you create a timeline by which the governor may not be able to finalize his plan by October 2nd of this year. If that happens, since there is no time frame allowed for an extension in the agreement, who knows what could happen? It could just reauthorize for another 35 years, and everything that's been spent in the last 5 years goes away. The time has come to let the parties who have been working on this for 5 years finish the process, get it to the governor. He'll consider everything. He'll make his decision. There's a great compromise, a compromise that I have read, a compromise that I have gone to public meetings. I've engaged with many of you. I've engaged with the owners. I've listened to everybody. It's a compromise. Nobody's going to be 100% happy with it. This ordinance isn't the way to assert power, grandstand, whatever. It's time to let it go. You don't have standing. I know you want standing, but this isn't the way to do it. Thank you very much.
Anyone else wish to be heard? Please come forward. Please state your name, what part of town you're from. You'll have 3 minutes.
My name is Dustin Laura. I am from Anchorage. My family is from Eklutna. I am a tribal council member. I hold a position of trustee. I am also representing EI to some degree and the landowners, representing the shareholders. I hear what he's saying. Everyone talks about 100 people versus the majority. But my opinion, this is a constitutional violation, a Fifth Amendment, taking clause. No state, no government should be allowed to take things, private property from its citizens. It's ridiculous to assume otherwise. Now, we believe our fishery was an asset. We believe the land was an asset. Land with water running through is an asset. It was diverted 94 years ago, and there was no compensation given or regard to the people that resided downriver. Now, the taking clause, Fifth Amendment, I'll paraphrase, nor shall it take private property for public use without just compensation. Now, you talk about those 100 people that live in Eklutna. They've never been compensated. And we're not even asking for compensation today. We're just asking that the utility groups do right by the 1991 agreement and mitigate the damage the 2 dams have done. And both dams have been owned by government, the state. Now, in today, with the prevailing opinion for licensing, requirement would be the tribe agreeing to the option, agreeing that the plan would work for them. Now I'm saying on behalf of the tribe, the plan as it is, the AWU portal, does not work for us. And we want the utility group to make this right. Now, if we're talking about a corporation coming in and they diverted the water for its own use and killed the fishery, devalued the land, the state would take offense, people would take offense, but because it's a public utility, why aren't more people taking offense? It's not just 100 people, it's 275,000 plus 100. We're a part of that community. We're a part of a greater community, and we're just asking for help. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard on this item? Anyone at all? Seeing, hearing none, public hearing on this item is now closed. What's the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Moved by Ms. Zolotow.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Volin. Mr. Myers, you had yourself in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually had a question for Mr. Whitbeck, if he can come back up to a microphone. Thank you, Mr. Whitbeck. Based on the statements that you said, I've heard you on the radio several times over the past couple of months, and you've been consistent about the process and wanting the assembly to stick to their lane and the 1991 agreement to be part of the process and followed. So I really have a two-part question for you. Why do you believe the assembly is going outside of their lane, if you will, with this ordinance? And second, what do you think would be a result of them passing this ordinance?
And please, let's be brief. We are time
Understood.
limited.
To the member through the chair, I think first of all, I appreciate the questions. Number one, you gave up standing with the MLNP agreement. Period. There is no voting membership, and creating it by ordinance at this late date is laughable. You've had 5 years. You've had 4 years, 4+ years to deal with this. The time to act would have been any time in that time period, not 30 days before it goes to the governor. The second question, I see one of two outcomes, and neither one are good for the overall citizens of the municipality. If you pass it and choose to litigate, which I've heard time and again is an option, you're spending public money going after bad results. Nothing you can do now between now and the end of April is going to keep that from going to the governor. You can't get there from here, timing-wise. Nothing I see allows for the process to be delayed. So the timeline and the reauthorization of the 1991 agreement is clear. If the governor fails to act, again, nobody knows what's going to happen, but
I'm going to
There's a risk.
here and just try to hew this down because we are running on limited time.
Okay, I had one follow-up question.
Okay.
The comment was made that there isn't a voting power, I guess, with the members. Is that for the municipality? Is that for the administration? Or is that for the assembly? Because I'll be quite frank, this is a complicated situation and I am not an expert in it at all.
the way I understand it to the member is that when MLNP was sold, and I'm not an attorney, somebody's probably going to correct me on this, but when MLNP was sold to Chugach, until the RCA approved a person to sit in on this from the municipality, that position was vacated. It's still vacated. Nobody's taking care of it. So it says it requires at that point in time, 2020, it requires unanimous consent between the two remaining owners that are involved in the decision-making process, Chugach and MEA. Until the muni comes with that, I think it's really clear that document has not been overridden by an RCA ruling.
All right, thank you. Now we're going to move on. Ms. Zolotel.
Thank you. I'd like to start with the amendments. So I'm going to move constant amendment number 1.
Second.
Motion to amend by Ms. Zolotel, seconded by Mr. Wallen. Zolotel.
Thank you. This clarifies that the mayor maintains authority over all operational decisions of the utilities, but other policy decisions, including those related to the municipality's performance under the 91 Fish and Wildlife Agreement, come to the assembly. This really just codifies what we've been having conversations around. There are implications possibly for AWU and its rates, which is something that the assembly typically authorizes before it goes to the RCA. Similarly, there's a property tax implication proposed in the current proposal. And so making sure that we have the ability to weigh in up front versus coming to us saying, assembly, you must levy this property tax because this commitment was made. That the mayor and the administration are not in a position to be able to commit us to do something. That's a separation of powers issue. So this amendment just makes that clear in the ordinance. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing seeing none, members may proceed to vote.
Member Myers,
No.
Member Martinez,
Yes.
Member Rivera,
Yes.
Member Bronga,
Yes.
Member Johnson,
Yes.
Chair Constant,
Yes.
Vice Chair Zolotel,
Yes.
Member Cross,
Yes.
Member Voland,
Yes.
Member Brawley,
Yes.
Member Salt,
No.
Member Presverdia.
Yes.
That passes 10-2.
That vote of 10-2, the amendment has passed. We're not going to move amendment number 2 because we decided Although the matters within it are germane, we'll come back to that question in a separate time after we've had an opportunity to speak with a number of other parties relating to the subject of the amendment. So now we have the main motion before us. Ms. Zalatel.
Thank you. So this ordinance is really a culmination of the efforts we've been making to date to ensure that the assembly is in its role as appropriator and its oversight role with utilities gets to remain in that role, and that role is not usurped. And that we are executing our role consistent with the policy that we have adopted in code. And so, I heard the public testimony, and the narrative out there is just really false. We learned about this whole issue around voting and the 91 agreement a couple of months ago because we were not otherwise briefed and informed. And we're not in the position to hire for that individual. We can only confirm once a person who is qualified is brought forward. So I really feel like that's in the moment somewhat of a non-issue. I think at this point, it is really about our role as appropriators, as our ability to make decisions around taxation and make wise decisions about how property taxes in particular and the public's money will be spent because there are public pieces to this. And then additionally, what what fiscal impacts might exist to other utilities such as AWU, and will we be able to ensure that that operation is sustainable and can meet the needs, right? We're not talking about something with the 91 draft agreement here, or with the 91 agreement and the proposed option that will simply be for a year or two. We're talking about something that would become a part of the infrastructure attached to our critical drinking water infrastructure. So this, again, is really a culmination of the work we've been doing leading up to this. We've tried and tried again to get the parties to come back to the table to have this conversation, and just doing it through code makes it crystal clear on our role. And I believe it is very consistent with the role the assembly plays as to other municipal business. Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Colhase.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would ask Mr. Byrd to please speak to this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will be brief. I will not address the legal issues. As you know, we have the municipal attorney here, Ms. Ann Helzer. I did want to address, from the administration's point of view, two items. Number one, the amendment and the idea of the mayor being only responsible for operational policy. You may recall, Mr. Chair, we were here not so long ago, and the assembly was saying that we must now approve all operational agreements as dispositions of municipal property. We're at a loggerheads. It's inconsistent to say, well, the mayor only has to do with operations, except for the operation agreements that we must now approve. Which leads me to my second point, Mr. Chair, and I think Member Zalatel, through the chair, we agree on one thing. This is a consistent trend of an encroachment on the executive branch. I look back to not just that purchasing piece of legislation that had to do with dispositions of municipal property, but even back in 2021 when my predecessor, Mr. Bockenstedt, was here, and there was the clawback for emergency procurements that was laid out in AO 2020-133, the S version. That was even before our administration was in office, but Mr. Bockenstedt and others of Ms. Quinn Davidson's administration pointed out that clawing back procurement hampers the executive branch. Again, that was a point made not by this administration, but by a prior administration. Those same encroachments on executive authority we've seen through the last 2.5 years when it's come to the equity officer, the ombudsman, impeachment, the bonding issues, and now the subpoena that is the other portion of this meeting after this matter is considered. The mayor took an oath to uphold the charter, and that includes a strong mayor form of government. We see this as but the latest in a series of encroachments upon the executive authority, and that's why the administration can't support it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Braga.
I think I just heard you say we've only really known about this for a couple of months, that there was only two parties at the table for decisions. And then we had this other gentleman say that it's been like 4 or 5 years that we should have known. And I really don't know how much time we've had that we possibly could have been working on this prior. But I feel a little bit like Mr. Myers that this is way out of my wheelhouse. Like for me to make a decision on this enterprise utility, I don't feel like I have the skills to do it. I mean, for this to say that everything comes through us now, I don't know. I just don't feel like I have the information to make a really great decision on it. I know that there's, besides the two utilities, there's one municipal employee that could have a voice, and that position's not filled. Is it possible we could wait for that position to be filled or press for that position to be filled so that our voice would be heard through someone that may have more knowledge?
Ms. Salato.
Thank you. So that position has been available to be filled. It's been budgeted and funded throughout this administration and the prior administration. And so I don't know when it will be filled. I don't know 100% what the efforts to fill that position have been to date. I also would say, in response to learning about this kind of vote situation, we did not know, right, that the RC, that through the, we always believed we were one of three at the table, the municipality, MEA, and CEA, Chugach. And at a work session, Mr. Bowman let us know, no, really, we don't even have a voting stake anymore. And as someone who's been deeply involved in this, I was surprised to hear that no one had ever said it to us. And our involvement with the Eklutna has always been, we get briefed, we get information, we take in that information, and we've made policy decisions, policies that we, by resolution originally, and then later by ordinance. And now it's come to a decision point. And really, this ordinance says, because it implicates our taxing authority primarily, and also could have an effect on AWU's rates, and we approve whether or not a rate case goes from AWU to the RCA, that we get to weigh in on this, because otherwise you're usurping our ability to play the role that we've always played with regard to levying taxes and approving rates or the disposal of municipal property or interests in property. And I agree, it's a lot. It's a big issue.
And I would add that the traditional role of the assembly in any of these, and this is not new, it is not taking anything from the administration as they always like to suggest, we have always had the right to decide water rights on what we pay for and purchase for water, on how we dispose of or acquire land or leases to land. That has always been within the assembly's purview. It has been usurped by an administration, but it has always been our role. Easements, capital budgets as a whole, the number of positions in any department, in any utility, what the executive branch's authority to do is determine that money has been appropriated, we will spend it in the following way to achieve that policy. Or they have given us X number of positions, they can change within the number of positions what the person does for their daily job, but they can't just go adding positions without it actually coming before the assembly through the budget process. And so we actually have that role, have always had that role since the charter was created and the municipality was originated. But there has been a strong movement by this administration, as witnessed when we sat in here with the attorneys from Roger Hickle Company and had to decide to write a multi-million-dollar check because our authority was usurped by this administration. What we're doing with this tool effectively is saying, not again. We need to be in front of this. And so that's the response I would give to your question. It isn't baffling when you see it in context, because in context it comes with a briefing from the utility leadership saying this is what and how and why we want to do it. This is our proposal. Please say yes or no. So I have a few people in the queue still. Mr. Myers, then Mr. Salt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so I want to piggyback on what Member Bronga had said because I'm still unclear. We heard Mr. Whitbeck testify that we don't have a seat at the table, and by we, I mean the municipality of Anchorage. But then Member Zolotel just said that we have a seat that's been unfilled. So I guess I want some clarification. Is there a position that somebody could be sitting there that hasn't been filled by the administration, or is there not? Because I'm certainly unclear on this, and like Karen had mentioned, I'm not comfortable with it.
Through the chair to Mr. Meyer, yes, there is a vacant position that is currently not filled.
Thank you.
I guess whose role is it to fill that, and why isn't it filled?
Again, to Mr. Salt or Mr. Meyer, sorry, it's the administration's role to fill that position. We have attempted to fill it. We've had a couple of candidates, one of whom was qualified and then moved out of state and ultimately declined the position. We've had another one who did not meet the qualifications. The qualifications of this position are fairly strict. Thank you.
Can I ask one more follow-up, Mr. Chair?
You have the floor.
Okay, so was the testimony that Mr. Wickback gave not accurate then? Because he mentioned that we didn't have a voting member since the
You have to
2020
answer that, Ken.
agreement that was signed by a
It's
former
true.
mayor.
No, that is a true statement.
Which one's true?
That we do not have a voting right at this time on the question of the operation of the Anchorage Hydropower utility within the group of the 1991 agreement. That is-
Since 2020 or since when? I guess that's why I'm confused.
Yeah, since the transaction of MLMP to Chugach Electric. If you want, Ms. Halser, you can add to that, but I think that's generally the case.
Maybe you want to clarify when the,
When the RCA acted after the
right,
transaction.
I think these dates are important. I don't have them in front of me. I'm not really prepared to provide the historical background on this. And I think this is part of the concern that this paperwork just arrived about an hour ago. So I have not had a chance to ensure that all of the information in it is accurate. So I would defer to a later date to provide this information. My apologies.
All right, thank you. Mr. Salt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess I have iterate some of the same concerns. One concern that we're editing or usurping executive branch power, and we're based on equal but separate forms of government. We have two legs, not three. But as we take away from the administrative branch, and we have right now a unique ability to do that with, basically veto override at will, we really have one form of government. So I have deep concerns with that and maintaining that balance of power. Two, like Member Bronga said, I feel like we're getting in the waters that we don't have the depth to understand, and whether we're going to approve what comes before us or whether we're going to want to create what comes before us. Because I don't think we're in a position to create. So when the recommendation comes from the owners, I'm not sure how we can question the experts to say, no, I know you're the experts, but you're wrong. And I don't think, and I'll just go on a side tangent, I don't think anyone doesn't want to restore salmon, restore flow to the river. I am also a bit deeply concerned that we try to rush this to where we put further pressure on our natural gas resources in Cook Inlet before we can have a solution to that issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cross, you're in the queue.
Thank you. It's a struggle because I'm conflicted by this because at one thing, I want to make sure that we do the right thing. At the same time, I make sure that we follow the correct process. So a couple things that I hear that really frustrates me is one, I really just think that, and I'll be on it because it's my last meeting, that the owners group has just been disingenuous. And I'm sorry, but they just have, okay? You can't sit here and actually read the entire 91 agreement and not look at Chapter 8. The purchaser agreed to comply with AMC 1193-151 with respect to safety inspections, new construction, modification of existing structures, or removal and abandonment of all of the project. and not think that restoring water to the river, to the lake, restoring the river water to the lake wasn't the original idea. It all comes from this bypass valve that was shoved down our throat starting in April of 2023, less than a year. They had 30 years. And less than a year before it's due, they show up with their homework. My kid waits till the day his homework's done, and he had all spring break to do it, and he throws some crap on my plate, and I don't like it. I shouldn't be the bad parent for going, what did you do? You had 30 years. So I'm conflicted with that and wanting to make sure that as we said the Pledge of Allegiance and the last three words in justice for all doesn't get lost just because it's expensive to have the justice for all. So, but at the same time, I got to muster all that frustration to make sure that we follow code and make sure we follow what was in what we said we would set out to do. And for that, I revert to Mrs. Hauser, on what does this open us up for? Does it create, because I don't want to also unintentionally create more legal expense because it seems like too much of our money in the municipality is being spent in lawsuits. What are the unintended ramifications of passing this, in your opinion? Thank you.
Keep that off.
So through the esteemed chair, I appreciate the questions. I have made multiple efforts to try to get an executive session on this issue. Unfortunately, those efforts were declined. We have made our office open for assembly members to come in and to evaluate these documents, to view them, to have questions about them. My door is always open. I just received this paperwork about an hour ago. I have not had a meaningful time to review them. There are concerns with removing powers that are in code existing today and bringing them to a different branch of government. I would say the same if the mayor's office were to propose an ordinance that removed powers from the assembly to the mayor's office. So the municipal attorney's office door is wide open. And I would encourage that these questions, this is complicated. It is not something that can be absorbed in a short amount of time. I would encourage that we put the brakes on and review the information so that you can make the best decisions possible with not just information that you've just received. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I may share just a follow-up, and this is where I get conflicted, and I guess this is where it would be helpful. And I don't know if someone wants to move from an executive session so we get that, but I know, again, it seems like we're here at the last minute. But I almost feel as if the assembly gets forced into this because that position, that voting position sat vacant for years. And it's not this administration, it was a prior administration as well. Okay? They have not seen the urgency in understanding the timelines, and that since we don't have a voting voice, you can always argue that they've been considerate in our decision, but ultimately that's arguable. We haven't had a voice, so I almost feel as if the assembly needs to step in. That's what we're trying to do because the past two administrations have not filled that voting seat. They have not made it a priority, or at least hasn't expressed to us that priority. And all the multiple meetings I've sat here with the owners group and the Eklutna Inc., they haven't showed up and say, hey, listen, we don't have a voting voice. This is what we're doing to fill that position. It's been birds. Okay? And so this is where that comes. It's the frustrating position of the assembly where we feel like if no one's going to speak for the people and you're going to leave that voting position vacant for years, then the assembly almost feels like, I feel like our hand gets forced, which is not a position that we want to be in. And it's so exhausting. And when we talk about the experts and you say, and Randy, you said, well, the experts are wrong. Remember, it was the owners group who said their own experts were wrong. It was the owners group who said that our fish studies of how many coho or how many sockeye were in the lake. And the owner and the scientist said, no, you're misrepresenting our information. It was the owners group who said, wait, no. Our own experts who did our studies, they don't know what they're talking about. We agree differently with their own findings. Okay? So let's just remember that, right? So when it comes to who's claiming experts, so that's why this whole process is frustrating. That happens on an election year when our mayor is trying to get, when our mayor wants to retain, he's got to secure our water rights. And meanwhile, they gave us less than a year to go through this, when they had 30, It's so frustrating. I almost feel as if the assembly gets forced into these asinine situations that may end up costing the voter hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, and it's exhausting. Thank you.
All right. I have next Mr. Vaughn and then Mr. Martinez and then myself.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I just want to take a moment to encourage my colleagues that we don't need to shy away from complicated things. We've done a lot of complicated stuff. We've dealt with very complex legislation, whether that's rebuilding the port. I could go on and on. And I'll just say, we are the legislative body. We're the guardians of the fisc. We're the policymakers. We're the appropriators. And so we have every right to be at the table and to be making policy decisions on behalf of our constituents. I do not at all see this as some type of power grab, but I will strongly echo Member Cross's comments that there has been an abdication of leadership in this instance. And so we have to step up and we have to do the complicated thing and have the hard conversations. And so with that being said, I will be supporting this, and I strongly urge my colleagues as the policymaking body to support this as well. Thank you.
Mr. Martinez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll say a few things, Mr. Chair, and please, I'll address them to you, and if I'm wrong, please correct me along the way. It seems to me, Mr. Chair, that there's a difference between the conversation of the voting rights with respect to the operating committee and the decisions thereabout, and then the ability for the assembly's ability to approve the disposal of water rights, mineral rights. It seems like those are very different things. And so it seems like they're being all jumbled together, and respectfully, I don't care who made a decision in 1991. If the decision was a bad decision in 91, then we should fix it today with respect to people thinking somehow that the assembly is overstepping its boundaries by doing the basic stewardship of the things of the municipality, those property rights, the water rights, mineral rights. And so respectfully, it just seems that if there is not a person in this particular role with respect to the voting rights that we have not had an opportunity to exercise, those are different things than the separation of power in my mind with respect to who, at the end of the day, asserts the right to take away the right of the public vis-a-vis the assembly to determine the disposal of the rights of water and mineral. It just seems to me that that is not the same things we're talking about. So if you all want to get your voting rights expert onto the thing, then put the person in the role already and get that job filled fundamentally. But that's separate to me, Mr. Chair, from the conversation of when does the assembly lose its right to have oversight of the disposal of the things of the municipality? When does that happen? And what agreement do we have that somehow some third-party agreement does that, removes the right of the assembly? It seems to me that we're just asserting the clarification that all agreements could be made, deals could be talked about, but at the end of the day, when the issues get really heavy to weigh in, I respectfully stand to these conversations thinking about Mr. Gonzalez in my community, or I think of Miss Mary, who may not know anything about what we're talking about, but who I have to hold accountable myself for the actions to those folk who I represent. And at no point in any of this journey do I see that the assembly should give up its rights to ultimate oversight of the assets of the municipality. And if it's not clear for people, then I think we're taking that step today to make it abundantly clear that we have those rights to oversight the disposal of the assets. And if I was wrong, Mr. Chair, then please make any corrections along the way. Thank you.
I did not disagree with you. I have myself in the queue, then Mr. Colhase, then Ms. Zalato.
Mr. Consett?
Thank you. So I appreciated the testimony of Mr. Whitbeck. He has been speaking on this matter all over the place, so I certainly wonder if he is a lobbyist at this point. because I've heard him on the radio, I've heard him in the room, I've seen his emails. And so that is an open question. And then the question following that is for whom? The term restoration is not in the agreement. Yes, it was spoken to briefly. The word removal absolutely is. And I will say, I was just shocked and horrified to hear a statement that we should stop putting the interest of 100 people of the native village of Eklutna before 270,000 residents of Anchorage, because to me, that is the same story we're here combating. And it is a story that has a name. I will not name it here. It names itself. The argument was made that the time to act is not now. It was 5 years ago, 7 years ago, the Assembly by resolution stated that the policy of the municipality is the restoration of that river. The owners group ignored. In 2018 and 2019, again. In 2023, by ordinance now, again. And the only reason this is happening at the last minute is because at the last minute, in October, when the deal was published, their plan, and there was a binding term sheet that was established, it became apparent that terms were bound, that they did not have the right to bind. And we'll get to that conversation second today. The reality is that if we do not speak up, then we sacrifice our rights. And we have seen that here again. I'll speak to Hickle and the millions we spent because somebody in the executive branch negotiated away the Assembly's authority, and on the back end, we held the bag and nothing else. The municipal attorney suggested that if a proposed ordinance from the mayor violated separation of powers, then she would speak against that. But it's not an ordinance that concerns me. It's a document that's called binding, or an agreement that's made that omits the Assembly from the process, that is the violation of the separation of powers that concerns me, because the mayor couldn't pass an ordinance that did what you suggested, remove powers from the Assembly. Only the Assembly can do that. But by action, for sure, the administration can do that, unless we hold the line on where the separation of powers exists. This ordinance was introduced 8 days ago. It's not a lot of time, but it wasn't introduced an hour ago. This ordinance was laid on the table at our meeting last Tuesday. And so everybody had an opportunity to read at least the ordinance, the changes, the amendments could be argued. Yes, you just got that an hour ago. And the memorandum, which is not the binding document, that's definitely true. I think that there is an interesting kind of catch-22 here, or a bind. It's a two-faced argument, really, that we don't have a vote at the owners group of the Eklutna Hydropower Project because the RCA determined the municipality does not have anyone qualified to make those decisions. Okay? So let's assume that's true. It is the RCA. It's true. Yet, there is somebody who they've determined, the municipality has determined, is qualified enough to sign a binding term sheet that binds the rights of that utility. It cannot be both. And in the absence of an executive with the qualifications to make the determination on the disposition of a municipal asset, whether it be the hydropower, which we are still a 53.3% owner of, or water rights, or other rights, construction, bridges, towers, easements. The Assembly is the qualified entity because we are the voice of the people. And so, for all of those reasons and more, I urge your support on this item. Mr. Cole-Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to have Ms. Helzer respond to some of the comments that have been made. Thank you.
Well, through the esteemed chair, I wanted to address some of the comments the members have made. One is from Member Voland. When I said this is complicated, I'm by no means suggesting that you're incapable of understanding the information. I think you are very capable of understanding information. But I'd like you to know that when I first started reviewing these documents, they were extremely complicated for me. And it took me a long time to read through the Fish and Wildlife agreements and the joint defense agreements, and now recently the binding term sheet. And it is not, I want you to know, I fully understand you're able to understand this, but I don't believe you've had an adequate amount of time to fully be briefed on everything, which is why I requested an executive session on March 1st to
Point of order.
discuss
Thank you.
this
Please.
with you.
So I believe the point of order is, Ms. Hauser can give us legal advice, and that's kind of the extent of what the municipal attorney can give. And I think that it needs to be accurate. And I think, to say that that it is a executive session related to this ordinance, I think is not true,
It is true.
because this ordinance did not exist when the executive session was requested.
That is correct, but this issue,
Hold on,
Eklutna,
Ms. Halser. I am going to rule on the point of order, and I believe the point of order is an argument that the municipal attorney's function is to provide advice, legal advice, on the merits of the questions before us. And I think at this point, I'm going to rule that the municipal attorney can continue, but within the confines of the role of the municipal attorney, which is advice. And I will be happy to share with the assembly members the email requesting the executive session, in which it was requested to provide us a briefing on the separation of the roles of the municipal attorney and assembly council, and 5 other items. And one small item within it was part of the question about Eklutna. And those matters are not legally eligible or valid for an executive session. And so we can have a discussion at another time about what subjects are eligible for executive session. This ordinance may. So, Ms. Halser.
thank you, esteemed chair. I didn't intend on going beyond any limits of this conversation. I was just impressing upon all the members the importance of having all of the information that we can possibly provide to you so that you can make the very best decisions. And in fact, I politely correct the chair. There were not 5 items that I had requested to talk about. This was one of possibly 4, but I believe 3 that I had asked to brief the assembly on. Also, I have tried to meet with members to have these conversations because I think they're important, but they do touch on legal issues, and the appropriate forum for that, where I can address all the members at the same time and provide all of this information without concern that I am jeopardizing any protection I might otherwise have for the municipality. That is why I recommend that type of forum. And I would continue and be happy to request that again if the body was interested in having a full briefing on this issue with all the information and endless possibilities for questions. That's all. Thank you.
All right. I'm going to ask for a motion to extend.
Move to extend to 4:15.
Motion to extend by 15 minutes.
Oh, yeah, total.
Can we do 4:30?
Sure, 4:30.
Motion to extend to 4:30 by Ms. Salatil. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Brawley, is there any objection? Hearing and seeing none, the meeting is extended to 4:30. So I think then I have Ms. Brawley in the queue, then Ms. Salatil.
Yeah, thanks. Just briefly, first, I do support this ordinance and I intend to vote for it. Second, I've heard an interesting kind of set of themes that we need more time to understand this, that this is a very complicated issue, and also stating again that we don't have currently a qualified executive in the position to perform the duty representing the municipality, the hydropower person, just to be clear. So that seems actually in line with what the native village of Eklutna has been asking for, which is to take more time on this decision. And that is the decision that this assembly supports and I personally support. It is to say, let us not make a final determination on this by the governor. Let's not do that in April. It is to some degree an artificial timeline. There is nothing that says we have to make that decision at all costs with no other considerations. The ask is for that more time. And then also, I just want to be clear, the ask is to allow for or to commit to eventual removal of the dam. As I understand it, the ask is not to take it down tomorrow, next year, maybe not even 7 or 8 years from now, but really to say when we can do that, when we have other alternative energy options in place, such that this very small dam that actually does not produce a whole lot of power in the grand scheme of things. It is not the Bradley Lake Hydro Project. It is a small dam that is, I believe, about 100 years old at this point. There is nothing that says that we need to make this decision now, and there is nothing that says that we can't take more time to figure it out. And there is nothing that says that the decision that is made itself cannot incorporate the idea that we would commit to something at a future time. So all of what I've heard about it being complicated, that we need more time, and that we don't have the right people in the positions to do that suggests that it actually strengthens the argument that we have been making. And I understand my colleagues way before I started on this body have been making. And so again, I do have serious concerns about the things that we've learned in the short time that I've been on this body. And I do really support that we move forward with this ordinance. Thank you.
Mr. Hurt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to address a couple of questions regarding the timeline that some of the members had. And I apologize that this isn't in the AM. And I would also like to remind the chair to make sure we lay the AM on the table before we vote on the AO.
Hold on, let's just do that right
Okay.
now. I'm going to read the title of the AM AO 2024-28, an ordinance, the Anchorage Assembly amending Anchorage Municipal Code Section 3.20070, 2520.020, 2530.020, 2630.025, and inserting new Section 2640.090 to require Assembly approval of actions to acquire, dispose of property rights to water, mineral, wind, and solar resources of the Fish and Wildlife Program for Eklutna Hydropower Project and restoration of continuous water flows to the Eklutna River. So this item is supplemental. It's an unnumbered AM and is now entered into the record. Mr. Hurt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in 1993 is when the Assembly approved the purchase of the Eklutna Hydro Project from the federal government. And at that point, they had a 53% stake in the ownership of the Eklutna Dam Hydro Project. Following that purchase, the municipality and Chugachan MEA formed an executive operating committee, which the rules of which essentially said that the municipality of Anchorage plus one other member had to concur. We were essentially in the UN Security Council, we had like the super vote because we had 53% of the ownership interest. It required us plus one other member to make any decision regarding the operation and maintenance of the Eklutna Hydro Project. In January of 2019 is when the Assembly approved the ballot measure going to the voters to approve the sale of MLMP to Chugach. And it was only in May 2020 when the RCA order removed our voting rights from the EOC, and it based that upon a lack of technical expertise, which made sense in the day-to-day operations of the EOC, but seemed a unique finding with regard to the Fish and Wildlife program. So the reason I highlight this is because the Assembly finds itself now in the position where they're still obligated to pay under the RCA's order the financial liabilities of the Fish and Wildlife program, whatever program gets put forward and approved by the governor, but they have no vote. And that was not a provision that either the Assembly or the people of Anchorage were on notice of at the time they voted to approve the sale of MLMP. So hopefully that's somewhat helpful to you.
All right, Ms. Alatel.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Mr. Hurt. That was very helpful because what it ultimately does is leave Matanuska Electric and Chugach Electric in the ability with the ability to commit the municipality to pay property taxes to fund whatever the option is. And that's not something that should be allowed. And I really appreciate Mr. Hurt bringing up really the difference between the operations agreement and the 1991 agreement. There is a distinct difference between the day-to-day operations of a utility, which definitely takes particular expertise, but coming up with what the remedy is, out of the 91 agreement, right? That is frankly a policy choice. It is and this has been my frustration with this process. This whole process has been viewed very narrowly. What is the minimum we can do to comply with this 91 agreement? To me, it is a missed opportunity. To me, this would have been the opportunity. This is a generational project. We could have dreamed big. We could have brought all the stakeholders to the table. In my ideal world, the MEA board would be here, the Chugach board would be here, the assembly would be there, the native village of Eklutna would be there, and we would hold a true round table to talk about the vision of this area and what assets we have in it, what interests we have in it. We need DOT over on the side. They've got a road interest over there, AWU, and we would really dream big about what the outcome is and what resources we could bring to bear on the issue at hand. And we would braid and leverage those resources. And yes, the outcome might be more than $57 million, but we would bring so many more resources to the table. And I think not having us at the table as the policymakers for the municipality limits that vision to date. And I hope that by passing this ordinance, we can keep that vision forward, that we ensure that if we are going to tax for whatever is going to happen, that we can talk about it with the public. It is their dollars. If ratepayers are going to pay, we can have buy-in. You don't want to levy taxes and you don't want to hike rates for something that the public doesn't believe in. This is a public asset. This is important stuff. And I just want to underscore that in thinking that way, it by no means suggests that it's water and power or fish. It's a yes and. How do we do it all? And in order to have that conversation, we need to reset the table with those groups and have that conversation. I think we are capable of just so much more. And so with that, I hope you'll support the ordinance. So hopefully there is the chance to reset that table and ensure that particularly our taxing authority is not abdicated to two utility companies, because that is unprecedented and a really slippery slope and something that makes me very nervous. So I would request your support for the ordinance.
All right, Mr. Salt.
So this is a question from Mr. Hurt, and it maybe Member Zolotel confirmed it, but you had said that it would require the municipality plus one other member to make a decision. But if the municipality is not represented, does that effectively stall out the process because we're not there to be part of that decision?
No, not anymore. The way the RCA order reads is that essentially the running of and all decisions pertaining to the Eklutna Hydro Project are left to Chugach and MEA, and we can attend, but we cannot vote until we appoint the qualified personnel and the RCA approves it.
Mr. Cross.
Thank you. And first thing I just want to recognize is the municipality, the assembly, we're part of the municipal government, right? Because under 3.20070 executive branch organization, the municipal attorney and Helzer, the department of the municipal attorney is responsible for providing legal services to municipal government, managing all civil litigation to which the municipality is a party. And I don't want to be, I see this dangerous precedent that because we have our own attorneys, we shouldn't listen to her, but that is kind of her job description through code. So I think we should be respectful and listen to what she has to say, regardless of whether we agree or disagree. So I would appreciate if we didn't necessarily cut her off when she's trying to make a statement. She's always been very professional, very kind, tons of information. So I think we owe it to her to listen and let her complete her thought. Adding on to that, and so I would, and did you have an opportunity to finish what you were trying to say? Because I find what you say valuable and I would like to hear it in its entirety. Thank you. Through which she's trying to do through code.
Again,
here.
it's fine. It just really, the role of the municipal attorney is to provide legal advice.
Which I believe she's trying to do, and I'm trying to allow her to do that because I think what she has to say has value. Thank you.
Through the esteemed chair, and I very much appreciate your kind comments, and I do care about delivering information, and I'm very frustrated when I can't do that because I want you to have the information. The role of an attorney is sometimes you have to provide the information that people need and not always what they want to hear, but that provides the first step where we can work together and figure out ways to achieve the outcome. But I'm not always going to be able to say what people want to hear, and that puts me in an awkward position. So I appreciate your graciousness in allowing me to speak now. Just very briefly, we've looked through some of this ordinance, and we generally actually don't have a problem with a number of the sections. And I can't say that we might not see something tomorrow because I've just really had an opportunity to look at it today with the amendments. But you know what I want the Assembly to understand is that what we are changing this from is that the mayor shall be responsible for policy decisions of the utility is what it said before. And we are changing it to the mayor shall be responsible for policy decisions of the utility subject to the limitations of, oh, I'm sorry, then there was an amendment for operational. So we are taking something, a policy decision from the mayor's office, and we are transferring that at least in part, to the Assembly. So, like I said, this is a change.
And so I guess, and I appreciate what we're doing as Assembly. Again, we know my stance on the restoration, but I do think this also runs afoul, and we'll have to take a look at 26.10.030. This is our code under utility rules and procedures. It says diversification of energy supply upon direction of the Assembly by resolution, the municipality utility shall use best efforts to negotiate the purchase power agreement for supports diversification of energy supply as provided. But basically what it says is that it does say in there the Assembly's action as far as utility oversight and procedure negotiations by resolution. It doesn't say by ordinance. And was that intentional? I mean, I guess my question for the attorneys, was that intentional and that's why it gave the mayor so much more operational power? Why it didn't say by resolution or ordinance, and why it says the Assembly's participation, was it specific why it says only through resolution? Does anybody know? Thank you.
If you want.
I would just suggest that the charter and our code is not designed to be changed because there's a certain set of circumstances that we want to fix. It generally will cause unintended consequences because everything is meant to work together in a way that each of the branches are supported and able to function together as a team. And so I would just caution any sort of what I call knee-jerk reaction legislation, because I think there is at least the possibility. So pointing that out, I would suggest it probably was intentional that it was a resolution, but I'm happy to take that back to my department and get all the brains together and provide you an opinion on that.
Which one trumps the other, a resolution or the code, an ordinance? Which one is superior?
Well, the ordinance would be
Okay,
superior.
an ordinance is superior. Thank you. So I'm going to be brief. We're running out of time on this. I'll just say, Ms. Helzer, one question. Were you the municipal attorney when the binding term sheet was negotiated?
I did represent the
Yeah,
interests
okay,
of the,
great,
no,
thank you.
please let me finish the answer.
Okay. The answer is yes.
AWU was represented by Michael
I'm
McLaughlin.
going to call point of order.
it's fine.
I
We're just
is not
bringing
for
up-
this
He asked
item.
me a question.
No, it is related to this.
So I'm going to call the point of order.
Okay, the point of order is on the
And
table.
so I'm going to make the point of order, and because the point of order is to what the chair has asked, I'm going to ask, I'm going to look to council about who rules on the point of order. But I think that this is not germane to the ordinance before us and
Okay.
that it is to the next
I'll
item.
withdraw my question. And I will just say that, Kevin, you bringing up that section of code exactly punctures the argument that the mayor has unilateral authority on all policies relating to the utilities. 26.10.030 is literally a caveat to the issue of the mayor having sole and unilateral authority on policy relating to the utilities. And so the whole point of this exercise is to make it very clear that that line in code does not subvert the assembly's ability to set the policies relating to all the things that we traditionally have the right to do: land rights, acquisition and disposal, leaseholds, construction projects, CIPs and budgets, expenditures, tax levies. All of those things are assembly authorities across the board. And so any assertion that that line, the mayor has the policy-making authority for the utilities, is caveated exactly by that section and every other section in the code that provides the assembly the authority to do its business as the charter has substantially created. One last chance for the administration, and then we've got a vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to offer Mr. Byrd one more opportunity to comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the courtesy. So through the chair to Member Cross's question and your point as well, Mr. Chair, I think the administration's position would be same as yours, Mr. Chair. Resolution has less legal authority, but so long as the assembly has the ability to bring a resolution forward, the onus is on the assembly to do so. This is now going backwards in what's being proposed in this ordinance, that it is on the onus of the administration to bring it before the assembly before it is legally valid. And this is the same argument that Ron had made, again, previous purchasing director, previous administration, here almost 3 years ago, when he said, when you want an emergency clawback provision for emergency procurement, you can pass a resolution to claw it back. There's no need to change code. Similar situation here from the administration's point of view. Thank you.
Thank you. And last note for me, the term sheet for the ML&P sale came to the assembly by ordinance before it was signed. And so some will argue this is different because this is not a sale of a municipal utility, but I would argue it still binds the rights of our utilities. And so it's the same. Okay, Ms. Bronco, very briefly.
It's really brief.
Yep.
So no matter what we do or decide on this, it's actually the buck stops at the governor, correct?
Not necessarily. It depends.
Okay, it's just, I got the understanding that he is the final say and he's going to look at water supply, recreation, and village way of life as the three decisions.
Those are the rules, but then the question is, does this go to court? And what does the judge say? And ultimately, the courts are going to rule because this goes to the federal courts for appeal. And so not the state courts. And it's the answer to that question is, classic attorney answer is, it depends, because there are many variables. Yeah. With that, I think members may proceed to vote because some folks have to get out of here.
Member Perez Verdia,
Yes.
Member Salt,
No.
Member Brawley, Member Voland,
Yes.
Member Cross,
No.
Vice Chair Zolotel,
Yes.
Chair Constant,
Yes.
Member Johnson,
Yes.
Member Bronga,
Yes.
Member Rivera,
Yes.
Member Martinez,
Yes.
Member Myers.
No.
That passes 9-3.
A vote of 9-3, AO 2024-28 as amended has passed the body. Ms. Zalatil.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we turn to our next item of business, I'd like to ask the municipal attorney question, if I may.
You have the floor.
Thank you. Municipal Attorney Helzer, are you able to provide us the binding term sheet in open session?
So I've been asked this question before, and I really want to explain the answer. There was a joint defense agreement, I believe it was called a joint defense agreement, at least, I think, I don't even have the date. I think it was 2017. It was dated. This was an agreement that was reached prior to my ever getting into this position. One of the terms of that agreement relating to this issue was that the negotiations and the conversations and any resulting agreements coming from this would be confidential. So I have been placed in the very awkward position to say that I am bound by history. There's an existing agreement that requires that any of these negotiations be kept confidential. That is why I've requested an executive session, and we had one, and I gave you the term sheet, and you all reviewed it. We've also invited assembly members to the office to see it for themselves, to ask questions. And so unfortunately, I am in a position to protect the interests of the municipality, which means to stand by our agreements that were previously entered into by other municipal attorneys. And I cannot breach, and I don't have that privilege as the lawyer. That privilege belongs to someone else, not me. So I have to uphold the confidentiality provisions that exist.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Alto.
Thank you. With that response, very thorough. Thank you, Ms. Helzer. I think we should move on to item 5A and do the late on the table item.
So 5A is potential action on resolutions regarding appeal of public records of a municipal utility, AWU term sheet related to the Eklutna Hydropower Fish and Wildlife Program, and possible subpoena for production of relevant documents. And supplementary to that is AR 2024-103, a resolution of the Anchorage Assembly approving the use of subpoenas to compel testimony and document production related to the 1991 Fish and Wildlife Agreement, Eklutna Hydropower Project, or water rights to Eklutna Lake pursuant to the Anchorage Municipal Code Section 2.30.085. Motion to lay on the table?
So moved.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry.
It's supplemental, isn't it,
supplemental,
Mr. Chair?
So it's already laid on the table. So then the motion,
Move to approve.
move to approve.
Second.
Motion to approve by Ms. Zolotel, seconded by Ms. Brawley. Ms. Zolotel.
Thank you. So this AR would authorize the leadership to issue a subpoena, and it really comes down to compel production of the binding term sheet so that the assembly may share the agreement with its counsel for legal review prior to a determination by the assembly regarding whether it is appropriate and in the public interest to make the agreement a disclosable public record. And that's on page 2, lines 19 through 22. That really gets to the gist of it. We do not have this document in our possession right now as a branch to have our own conversations about it. And we believe in consultation with counsel that it's best for us to be able to ask for this document so that we can bring it into our own branch, have those conversations with our counsel, likely an executive session, and make a decision. And that is separate and distinct. Those are the assembly interests from what Ms. Helzer has already advised. Thank you.
Mr. Salt.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Mr. Hurt, we're asking that you be allowed to see this document, but were you not at the executive session February 2nd? Have you not seen the document, or can you not see the document today?
So just to clarify, I'm not asking for anything. I was at the executive session and I have seen the document, and I assume Ms. Helzer would make it available to me. The purpose of the AR is to authorize a subpoena so that the assembly can retain a copy of it as opposed to having to repeatedly request from the municipal attorney's office, is my understanding.
Thanks, Mr. Salt. Then Mr. Gates had a question to ask. Mr. Gates' question, I think directed to Ms. Helzer, is who are the parties to the joint defense agreement? And as to your best of your knowledge, off the top of your head, the binding term sheet, who are the parties?
Unfortunately, I don't have that information right here, but I can get it this afternoon.
It'd be great if you can get it to us.
And I did want to clarify.
Go ahead.
You can get a copy of the binding term sheet. The only requirement is that it be kept confidential, because we would not want to expose the municipality to any breach of a prior agreement. Thank you.
Ms. Brawley and then Ms. Zolotel.
Yeah, I had a question. I don't know if it's for the municipal attorney or assembly council, but this mentions the 1984 agreement. This AR mentions the 1984 agreement regarding our water rights. And understanding that that expires next year, and that is a fact. So setting aside this issue, if we were just moving forward with the water rights item, does the assembly have approval of that? Or I should say, what role does the assembly have in that?
Based off the ordinance that just passed, it definitely should have approval authority over any agreement pertaining to water rights. I would argue prior to passage of the ordinance that just passed, you had that authority as well. The 1984 agreement was subject to assembly approval. And I think the historical understanding of the municipal government has been that that was within the assembly's authority to approve that agreement.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Ms. Zolotel.
Thank you. So it's not just, this subpoena isn't just about us being able to, whether or not we can go look at the document in Ms. Helzer's office. It's really that we can obtain a copy for our branch. We do have outside counsel working on this issue, and right now we cannot share that with outside counsel. Additionally, it lets us not require the municipal attorney's participation in any potential conversation we may have about whether or not we believe it is a document subject to public disclosure. We do have two branches of government, and at this point, it's my belief that we need to be able to take this issue up on our own. And this isn't an uninformed position. It comes from the prior conversation we had an executive session, which we can't have a conversation about. But it lets us then have this document that we would agree to keep confidential unless the assembly takes action otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Myers, then Mr. Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Ms. Zolotel actually answered several of my questions just now, but I wanted to ask Ms. Helzer's opinion about this AR.
I don't think well, I have not had that much time to look at this. It was laid on the table, so I've had less than an hour to review it. But my first impression was that it's not necessary for you to take the binding term sheet. And as long as the attorneys that are reviewing it agree to keep the material confidential, I think that would, we had that in writing, or we had that affirmation, I think it would be acceptable. The problem is, as I said before, we've previously agreed to keep this confidential, so it is not subject to public review. Thank you.
Can I follow up, Mr. Chair?
Please.
Does this open the municipality up to litigation or potential lawsuits?
Well, yes, if confidentiality is breached and there's an agreement asserting to protect that, then yes, it does. And that is why I've been trying to get an executive session so that I can impress upon you the reasons for why this is not public. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Colhase. Or no, I'm sorry, Mr. Cross first, then Mr. Colhase.
Yeah, I do this. Listen, I understand what we're trying to do. I also agree that the binding term sheet should be made public, but I do think we're going about this the wrong way. And you had said that while we're negotiating, those things are to remain confidential, right? Since this binding term sheet has been signed, has there been any further negotiations? Because I'm wondering, do we have a finished product, or is this something that's still in the works?
My understanding is that there are ongoing negotiations.
Okay, well then, and that was real important, because if it's binding and there's no longer, I would say at that point, it should be released because we've come up with some, somewhat finalized terms. But if it sounds like it's still in the blender and they're still working on it, then I would have to regretfully agree with keeping it confidential until those terms are finalized. So I think as much as I wish it were public, I think at this point we need to be patient. Thank you.
Mr. Colhase.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Helzer was able to respond.
Thank
to
you,
the
Mr.
issue before.
Presveria.
Thank you.
Just a quick question for the municipal attorney. If we were to pass this, wouldn't the assembly be bound by the same agreement that you're bound by for confidentiality? Is that isn't exclusive to the municipal attorney's office? That's true of the municipality as a whole. Is that correct?
Yes, it's true of the municipality as a whole, if I understand the question.
Thanks.
All right, so I have myself in the queue.
Mr. Casa.
Thank you. So that's where we find ourselves in a bind, that the binding term sheet, which I believe has terms in it that are binding today, that are not pending and subject to negotiation, from my read of it, does in fact assert an authority that if that entire agreement goes into effect, completely circumvents the assembly from substantial authorizations that we would have to do relating to issues like water rights for the next 25 years and how we're going to pay for certain items that are required under the binding term sheet, and will hand us a bill of 10 or more $1 million. And they'll just say, you have to figure out how to pay this, even though you didn't agree or have any prior approval. The executive of your municipality on your behalf, somebody who, and this is no strike against you, Mr. Colhase, the RCA has not found to be qualified to make such decisions on behalf of that utility or the other utility. The binding of those terms would be in effect the day the governor signs the bill or whatever document they send forward to him, the plan. And so the reality is we're in this bizarre catch-22 phase, and that binding term sheet will, if signed and approved and then executed to the point when it becomes a public document under the arguments of the individuals under this joint defense agreement that we've heard about, would subvert the assembly's authority to do its actual job. And then we would be left with the bag. Do we cut parks? Do we cut libraries? Do we defund the police to fund the $10 or $12 million? That is the 19% chunk of the $57 million. You know, what is the actual impact? And we need to study those matters, and we need our council to review it, a council that is not sitting in the room negotiating these things as a party to the joint defense agreement with the other owners, council that is somehow cabined off from the conversations that are happening in support of that agreement that was negotiated by members of the staff. And so of the 7th floor, the simple reality is if the terms in the binding term sheet go into effect, the assembly has been heavily looped out of the question, and we just get to pick up the pieces once again, like the Hickle conversation, just much bigger and for a much larger effect over time. It is novel to hear that we could receive that binding term sheet and possess a copy of it. I have to chew on that in my head, but Mr. Hurt.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just wanted to respond to that. I think the premise of accepting the binding term sheet with an agreement to maintain confidentiality may put the assembly in an untenable position, because you are required to make public documents public. Like you have a legal duty under the Alaska Public Records Act. The default position is that you make public records public. So if there is an item of contested, I mean, it meets the definition of a public record. The municipal attorney is asserting that an exception applies. And this body has already expressed skepticism that one of those exceptions would apply. I would caution the body from putting itself in a legally and ethically tenuous position where you have conflicting legal duties.
All right, thank you. I'm going to ask if there's anyone else. Ms. Branca.
You know, I went up to Mr. Bowman's office to read through the document. He was really welcoming and explained a lot of things to me. And Ms. Helzer's said anyone is welcome to go look at it with her. I I guess I don't really feel the need to, this sort of seems like chest puffing to subpoena people to come in. Maybe the chair of the assembly and the mayor and Ms. Helzer and our legal, but to bring someone into the assembly, I'm not feeling good about that.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Zolotel.
Move to extend to 4:40.
Motion to extend by 10 minutes.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Zolotel, seconded by Ms. Brawley. Any objection? Hearing seeing none, we're extended. Ms. Zolotel.
Thank you. I think what Mr. Hertz says really underscores the position we've been put in. We have seen a document that I believe is a public record. I've heard Ms. Helzer's explanation about what exception to it being published exists. I don't feel like it's sufficient, especially since prior agreements around how we access water. The 1984 agreement was a public document and subject to our approval. And an initial document that lays out binding terms that pretty much will lead to a follow-on agreement, I think is similarly a public document. And without disclosing anything what's in the document, but reading that document, there was finality to it that I feel really comfortable with, that I don't think it's, as someone put, still in the blender. I think it's been blended and poured out. And so I believe we need to be transparent about it. And I think it's very relevant that we have that conversation, because this is, I don't know if it should have been wrapped up in the 91 agreement and what was going to happen, but it is now. And so it's relevant now. And the only way for us to have that conversation, I think, is to have the document, subpoena the document, so we can have the conversation, and then we can make an independent decision as a body of whether or not it should be released as public or not. But I feel like step one, condition precedent to doing that, is having it and being very transparent about why we're requesting it and subpoenaing it, not just simply having it with the admonishment not to release it. Thank you.
Mr. Colhase.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Helzer would like to respond to that comment. Thank you.
Ms. Helzer.
Through the esteemed chair, I wanted to just respond to Attorney Hertz's comment. I respectfully disagree. I think that when you enter into agreements to keep things confidential, that would satisfy, I think that would satisfy the situation here. In fact, I think if you did subpoena this, I think there may be more of an argument that this should be a public record, and that action may jeopardize the municipality in terms of liability, because we would then be in breach of our prior agreements. So I would just ask you to consider that. If I had more time, I would be helpful in that way. I also wanted to point out Section 1601 of the Municipal Charter, 1601A. Each municipal utility shall be operated in accordance with the general standards common to the utilities providing the same utility service. I think this is important because utilities are operated in a certain way, and this is very far outside of what I would imagine typical common standards would be. Confidential term sheets are very common, and it allows people to get projects done, to go through a process. And so I would suggest that keeping it confidential is not uncommon. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a few people in the queue. Mr. Bresverdia.
My question was answered. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Martinez.
Thank you, Chair. Just a reverse on what we heard a little bit, maybe to municipal attorney or to Mr. Hurt can answer the question. Under what circumstances does the assembly have more protection for itself with respect to the two choices before us? If we are, for example, able to get the document without a subpoena, but with the caveat that we maintain the integrity of confidentiality, are we less protected under that circumstance, having received the document, than if we were to subpoena the document and then having the cover of the subpoena also on top of the confidentiality understanding? Which circumstance is the assembly more protected under? And if it's the municipal attorney, then that way, that may be an interesting choice for you to give us information that'd be helpful to us. So let's see how that goes.
Ms. Hauser.
I'm happy to answer the question. I just don't see a reason. We are willing to provide.
Point of order, is that the answer to my question?
That was legal advice.
I don't see the reason.
Oh,
Was that the, yeah, just, okay.
Go ahead.
respectfully, I think that if there was an agreement to keep something confidential, that would satisfy the provision for confidentiality in the original agreement. So I can't say whether one, if something is subpoenaed, if it's less or more confidential, or if it's by agreement, if it's less or more confidential. I think I would argue that to enter into an agreement to keep something confidential, that might be stronger. Once something is subpoenaed, now it maybe arguably could be a public record. I'm not able to get too deep into this at this time, but generally, I just don't see a reason if you're going to agree to keep it confidential. You're absolutely able to see it.
Can we have the second now with Mr. Hurt
Yes.
following up? I think Mr. Hurt was itching to respond as well.
I don't know about itching, but go ahead, Mr. Hurt. We are, maybe have to extend again.
I will try and keep it brief. Yeah, I would say I don't know that there is a path forward that makes it safe. For the individual assembly members, I think from your liability, as I said before, if you agree to accept the document with a agreement of confidentiality, I think that puts you in a legally tenuous position, because as stated by Ms. Helzer, it is a binding term sheet. It implicates the municipality's drinking water supply. It implicates the appropriation of funds that will be necessary. And it would put you in the position of a document that is traditionally in the public record and allows for vigorous public debate by this body. It puts you in a legal position where you would be, on one hand, required to maintain that confidentiality because of a previous agreement, even if this body unanimously agreed that it should be a public document and should be out in the public domain. The fact, it essentially puts you in the position of placing a confidentiality agreement ahead of what you perceive the best interests of your constituency. And I would always advise you to not ever put yourself in that position. The other point I want to make is that the value of confidentiality, while it is valuable, these kind of agreements, I mean, when regulating public utilities, when regulating things that are going to implicate people's mill rate and access to drinking water, that stuff is, even at the negotiation phase, frequently put out there. For example, with the sale of MLMP, we've cited this before, the term sheet was put out as a public document well in advance of the sale of MLMP. And even final contracts contain provisions for amendment. So you can have a final agreement, as I would argue this probably is, that gets amended later due to unforeseen circumstances. And that doesn't keep it from being a binding agreement just because it can be amended. So hopefully that answers your question.
We need another motion to extend 10 more minutes.
And I'm sorry.
It's not your fault.
So
Moved by
moved.
Ms. Zalatel, seconded by
Second, sorry.
Ms. Brawley. Any objection? Hearing none, we are extended another 10 minutes, so that's to 4:50. Anyone else? No, I just would offer then, put myself in the queue,
Mr. Constant.
that we are facing a situation in which we need to be able to robustly review and make decisions about the terms within the term sheet that we find are extraordinarily out of line in terms of the separation of powers and even this charter citation that we heard, 1601A AMC. And I think that I agree with the read that if we sign on to the agreement as confidential, then we are bound by the agreement as confidential. And the reality is, if in fact there are terms where they have merged the water rights, the 1991 agreement with the 1984 agreement that has to be renegotiated with this, then it isn't us who has created an unsquarable circumstance. It is the parties. And I want to finish where we started, that there is no universe in which Matanuska Electric Association and Chugach Electric Association in a binding agreement can bind Anchorage's water rights for the next 25 years, can force the taxpayer to pay money. There's just no way those two utilities, this is upside down land that we've been negotiated into. And so I urge your support so we can do our due diligence in this work and make sure that the best interests of the municipality as a whole are in fact monitored and met. So with that, I would ask members to proceed to vote.
Member Myers,
No.
Member Martinez,
Yes.
Member Rivera,
Yes.
Member Bronga,
No.
Member Johnson,
Yes.
Chair Constant,
Yes.
Vice Chair Zolotel,
Yes.
Member Cross,
No.
Member Voland,
Yes.
Member Brawley,
Yes.
Member Salt,
No.
Member Perez Verdia.
Yes.
That passes 8-4.
On a vote of 8-4, AR 2024-104 has passed the body. With that, we'll move on to audience participation. Anyone? Seeing, hearing none, we'll move on to member comments. Start on the phone, Mr. Bond.
No comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
No comment.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No comment.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez.
No comments, Chair.
Mr. Presverdia.
No comments.
Ms. Bonga.
No comment.
Mr. Myers.
No comment.
Mr. Cross.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Chair.
Ms. Zalatel.
Thank you. I want to underscore, highlight, circle, star my prior comment. I think we can do better here. And I really encourage everyone to think about how we can try to come together for a unified vision on this. This is too important to be quibbling about. This is big stuff and it's so important. So I guess with that, it's an open invitation to have this conversation, particularly with those utility boards and continued partnership with the Native Village of Eklutna. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brawley.
No comment. Thank you.
And for my part, I will just end by saying to the Native, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Salt. Sorry, you're sitting over there.
Yeah, I thought I got to go last. Hey, I just want to say thanks to Mr. Cross and enjoy retirement.
So for my part, to the people of the Native Village of Eklutna, we see you and we're here with you, shoulder to shoulder, pushing on this to get a fair deal, not just the deal that's cheapest for the folks who sell power. And we're going to fight as far as we need to until the parties understand that we're not going anywhere and we're willing to work with them to achieve this outcome. I have it on good advice that they are meeting with you soon or have met with you and will be meeting again. I'm hopeful that that proves to be true and fruitful and not just more of the same that we've heard every time we've met since 2017. Oh yeah, we hear you, but no. And so I hope it's, we hear you and yes, let's get together and figure this out. And so that's the point I'm working towards, is not a parties in the corner ready to fight each other when the bell goes off, but rather a solution that meets the best needs of all the parties as possible, which includes secure power, which includes secure water that's affordable and clean, which includes the returning of water that is meaningful enough to achieve the goals of the 1991 agreement, as well as the secondary agreement. The report that broke down how this was supposed to work, and the parties all agreed, the 1992, the divestiture report. And so as long as I'm here, I'm going to keep this up until we get there, because eyes on the prize, eyes on the prize. And the prize is the best for all of us. And with that, I too will turn to you, Mr. Cross. It has been a deep honor to serve with you. And I look forward to our connection going forward and you getting some good quality time with your lady. And with that, I promise this is the last meeting for you. So thank you for your service. And with that, we'll be adjourned.